Let's see, we're all here to talk about application instrumentation with application insights. How many people here actively use application insights today? I talked to a few of y'all before. Okay, so about half the room is using it. The rest of y'all, are you guys using something, anything to gather telemetry for your web apps? Or no, or don't want to answer? Or, okay. Well, good. This is going to be an introductory talk about application insights. For some of you all who've been doing this before, hopefully there's a nugget or two in here that you haven't seen. If not, please catch me after. I'm happy to talk more about it after the talk. A little bit about myself. My name is John Garland. I'm a technical VP and instructor at Wintellect. What that means is I spend about 3/4 of my time consulting on Azure projects, actually in the code, in the muck, working primarily on the platform side. And about 25% of my time writing courseware and going out and teaching classes on using Azure, either in the commercial or the government side. The company I work for, Wintellect, we were founded by Jeff Procyse, Jeff Richter, and John Robbins. And we have a consulting arm. We go out there and do a variety of consulting projects, custom app dev, custom web dev. We have instructor-led training where we'll come out and we'll teach classes at your site. And we have an on-demand video system that you can sign up to and watch training videos. I'm the author of a couple of books, Windows Store Apps Succinctly, and I co-authored the Programming the Windows Runtime by Example. And I've been a bit busy lately with the Azure stack. I'm a cloud solution architect with Azure, Azure Advisor, certified trainer, and an Azure MVP. But you're not here to hear me talk about myself. You want to hear me talk about App Insights. One thing, and I see a couple of you guys with laptops. If you want, this can be an interactive session. We've got this fantastic bulletproof e-commerce website set up for our demo today, appinsightsdemo.shinysiteup.org, and we're going to look at it in the context of maybe a few problems that we want to solve and what App Insights brings to the puzzle in terms of helping us solve those problems. Now, there have been some really good sessions so far at the conference here, the past day, I guess. And there's a couple more actually coming up as well related to this idea of DevOps. It's kind of the new Agile. You had Agile a few years ago, now you have to have DevOps. Or Donovan Brown, you got to sprinkle some DevOps on it and make it all better. But we're pursuing this idea of being able to release our applications quickly, and we've got this kind of catechism that we can adopt and follow and work into our programs, and use it to get on this fast, customer-focused development approach. We've got some really cool tools to Kanban boards and backlog and grooming management tools and all this cool stuff to figure out what we're working on and how well we're working on it. Development and testing, we got, whether it's Visual Studio, Eclipse, all these Visual Studio Code, all these other tools that we can use to develop our application. But then we got back-end build systems that, whether it's again, Visual Studio Team Services or other tools that'll build our code in the background, do continuous integration on check-in, run unit tests, make sure that our code is good on check-in. We've got all the release tools that are kind of cool. Release pipelines and gates and approvals, and the code builds and gets deployed to different environments and manages rings and all this wonderful stuff for us. But how do we get back to planning and tracking as we release our stuff? How do we decide what comes into the next sprint? What are we using to make those decisions? Sometimes it's the program manager or the product subject matter expert just kind of magically knows what to work on next, or has orders from on high as what's the next most important thing to do. Or it's the person in the room with the loudest voice. We must work on this next, and because I say so, and because I'm in sales and I've got a $3 million contract in my back pocket, or coming in and saying, I know that my users are having this pain point, and therefore you shall work on it. It's kind of this tribal decision sometimes to decide what to work on next. There's a fourth leg to the stool in DevOps, and it's a very important one. We talk a lot about the first three, not so much about the fourth one. Monitoring and learning from our application, and using that to feed in and empirically and objectively decide what needs to happen next. Now, forgive me for being a little bit cynical, but I think we've found relying on employees and customers both to say this is what's important in the application can be a little bit faulty. And why is that? Well, people who come to our sites or use our applications and things go wrong can't necessarily always be relied upon for giving information the best way. Something big goes wrong, well, okay, I guess. It's technology. It must be really hard. You'll also see people write 3-paragraph flames about punctuation errors on your sites. Sometimes, and this is the real kicker, your site doesn't work, they go to buy a product, the site crashes, they're just going to leave. They're not going to tell you what went wrong, they're not going to take the time out to fill out the little smiley form, they're just going to go away. That's one of the big problems right there, because then 49 people just like them are going to have the exact same problem, and you're not going to have any idea that it happened, unless you're gathering some kind of telemetry, doing some kind of monitoring over your application. The other thing is when something does go wrong and they do tell you about it, sometimes the information's a little sketchy. I was using the thing and it busted. Well, I'm going to need a little bit more than that to go on. The other side of the coin is people for whom things went well, they may not take the time to send you, I was using the site as it was intended and everything went absolutely perfectly. Thank you, nice job to the team. But if 7 people are having problems and 7 million are not, that may make your decision gate a little bit different than if 7 people are having problems and 3 people are not. So you don't quite know what that is, again, unless you're gathering information. And employees, if you're using them to gather the information, well, sometimes they bring in some bias about what their role is, what their area of focus is. Developers fall in love with certain functionality or want to work on certain tech or want to come back and redo something. Salespeople may view this as a potential avenue for a sale and may not think, hey, the sale I can get next quarter, is that more or less important than the site stability for a site that's experiencing a lot of ongoing errors? How do we factor that in? And the key thing, you got to use telemetry to help provide that insight. Yes, you need some of that anecdotal information and some of the touchy-feely stuff, but the telemetry really gives you that objective information about what is really going on with the application and what you want to do with it. Okay, so, well, all that's nice and good. What are we here to talk about? Application Insights is one tool that can help get you that objective telemetry. There's a bunch of others. Things like New Relic, Dynatrace, SolarWinds, App Dynamics. The AWS platform has got a couple tools that it uses to gather this as well. If you're not going to use Application Insights, look into one of these, please. Consider something. But we're going to be talking today from the point of view of Application Insights. These tools typically break into 3 functions. First one is ingest, helping you bring in that telemetry. Yeah, you can write code, and most of them offer SDKs that you can use to write code and provide the telemetry, but a lot of them have the ability to find the extensibility points that various frameworks that you're using offer in order to gather information and glom onto those extensibility points and use them to provide the insights. Application Insights, as you would probably think, works very well with .NET and ASP.NET in that regard. It knows where some of those extensibility points are in ASP.NET and knows how to attach itself to the pipeline and gather request information and gather exception information as it's flowing through the system without you actually having to do a whole heck of a lot. The other part is exploration. Hey, we got a bunch of data, and we talked about our keynotes over the last couple days. I got data, now what? How do I make sense out of the data that's coming through? How do I look at it in interesting and possibly prescriptive ways? How do I take and correlate this information? And the other thing is display it out. Make that data available to other people. It's great if only the engineers can look at the telemetry, but it's probably a bit better if you can make it available to the other project stakeholders and they can see project health in easy, maybe small words, but easy ways for them to understand. Dashboards and reports or alerts. Have pagers light up when things go wrong automatically. Now I got a bunch of slides here that I can talk about application insights with. I'm going to post those slides up. I'll tweet them out. I tweet it at .NET Gator, but I'll also do the Code on the Beach handle and make the slides available. We're actually going to look at this from the code point of view and just dive into the app, and y'all can look at the slides later because I think that this shows itself a lot better that way. Okay, so the first thing I've mentioned, we've got our fantastic website, our Shiny Site Up website, App Insights demo at shinysiteup.org. And it is our e-commerce motorcycle parts website. And in fact, we happen to have our big exhaust sale going on this week. And we've got the various exhausts that are on sale this week shown here, because that's all we have in the catalog right now. And so, our users are going to come and they're going to, pick an exhaust system that they want. And wow, that's the one I want. I'll add it to my cart and oh. And again, as I mentioned, at this point, I'm done with this site. I'm going to go to some other parts site where I can actually place my orders. I'm not going to fill out a form. I'm not going to do anything else like that. I'm just going to go. I'd like to find out a little bit about that. This, the first step with something like Application Insights is potentially you might find yourself in a firefighting situation. I haven't done anything to my app to gather the telemetry, but then again, I've got a problem I need to solve. And App Insights offers a firefighting mode solution. Basically, it allows you to, whoops, sorry about that. It allows you to instrument the application from over the top. It allows you to apply itself to some of the Azure platforms and monitor the application. I call it the outside-in view. It isn't going to give you a deep view of what's going on inside your code, but it can tap itself into the request and response pipelines and other parts of the system. It's actually quite easy to do if you're using something like web applications. It's not just limited to web apps and functions in Azure, though. It will actually something you can do with IIS things, whether it's in VMs, whether it's on premises. There's a little background process you can install called Status Monitor. You can get it from the web platform installer, download it, install it, and it will attach itself to IIS and gather information that way for you. But for the sake of a web app, you'll see Application Insights, it's front and center in web applications. They've put it here on the landing page. I can select Application Insights, and I can choose I want to set up App Insights. And I can choose an existing App Insights instance if I've already created one, or I can create a new one. And if I choose one, I'll go ahead and tell it what kind of framework I'm working with. This is an ASP.NET Core application. And I tell it, yeah, hey, if you can, look down into the code. Also, I'm going to tell it, yeah, go ahead and collect profiler and snapshot information. I'll talk more about what profiler and snapshotting does for us a little bit later. I hit OK, and it's going to make a couple of changes to my application. For time, I've already done that to our actual site. I'm going to kind of show you, the Betty Crocker view of things. I'm going to pull it out of the other oven. So if I go over here, adding that will have done two things to my site. First, it's going to add an extension, and this will take a half a second to load. But this is basically the equivalent of running that status or installing that status monitor. It's going to apply that Application Insights extension for Azure App Services. It'll go ahead and add that, and that'll gather that telemetry. The other thing it'll do, and I shouldn't have closed that, is over here in Application Settings, it's going to add a few key values. Just wait for it to load up here. It'll go ahead and load the instrumentation key. Can everybody see this okay? Okay. This instrumentation key. So App Insights, like most things, Azure relies on REST calls and exposes REST APIs. Hey, call the App Insights endpoint, record this telemetry for me. This key says, and by the way, this is where you're supposed to put that data. So the key identifies which store it needs to go into. It also, I selected ASP.NET Core, and then I'm also using the profiler and the snapshot collector. So those things get automatically put here into the project. And then I can start gathering a bit of, start looking at some of the problems and start figuring out what's going on. I'm going to take this a step further, and we'll see what some of that looks like in just a second. Because the next thing you can do is you can actually instrument and deploy your application with the telemetry collection in the application. I recommend do both. There's some complementary information that one gathers and the other does not, and doing both of them together is absolutely perfectly okay. I generally start this way. I will instrument the web app and then go in and add the telemetry to the client application. I'll explain why in just one second. So over here, I've got my client application, and where's my Solution Explorer? Okay, don't know why that went away. Let's hope that doesn't happen again. So I've got my application. It's an ASP.NET Core MVC application. I'll tell you a little bit more about the differences in core versus full framework, but for most case, it's virtually identical. To instrument the application, like all things Visual Studio, there's about 7 different ways I can do this. One of the more straightforward ways, I can go here to Connected Services and say I want to monitor with App Insights. I'll click here on Get Started, and I do keep a variety of accounts, so I do have to help Visual Studio decide which one it wants to use. And let's pray that the network gods are kind to me.
Have you tried to use App Insights with Visual Studio Code at all?
I have not tried to use it from a VS Code project. No, not yet.
All right.
Okay, so I've got my subscriptions. And let's see. And I want to attach it to an existing resource. I can also create a new resource from down here. That is that resource. Okay, stop flashing on me. There we go. Existing resource, and I'm going to go ahead and hit register. And this is going to instrument up my application. Again, the .NET full framework is a very similar experience. Let me show you once this thing gets done with what it's doing here, what it did. I actually have to do a couple more things really quick to get to where I'm going. I'm going to go in here, manage NuGet packages. They just updated the NuGet package for this on Wednesday. So I'm going, Visual Studio isn't quite as updated. In .NET Core, it's bringing in some cool stuff related to, it adds perf counters and a couple other things that .NET Core was blind to now are being collected. So let me upgrade that one NuGet. And the other thing, I do have to go get one other NuGet. In .NET Core, Snapshot Collector, and I've got a slanted podium, so my mouse slides away from my hand every time I take it away. You actually have to bring in the Snapshot Collector NuGet package in order to gather snapshots, which I will talk about, like I said, later. In full framework, they come in when you bring in the NuGet package by default. Okay, are you installed? Yes, okay. There's one other little thing I've got to do. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And I'm going to flip this. Okay. Let's take a look at, though, what all this ceremony went ahead and did for us. Nice thing about working with Git repositories when you're doing demos is you can do diffs. So the first one I want to look at is this program.cs. And we'll see it added into my pipeline use application insights. And if I dig into the implementation of that, nice thing about doing a decompilation with ReSharper is you can actually dive into your code like this. And a little bit of boilerplate. Basically what it's doing is it's adding to the dependency injection inside of .NET Core a variety of these initializers, modules, processors, things that are gathering telemetry for a specific purpose. It actually overdoes it. It goes out and it gets cloud service telemetry and web app telemetry and these other things, but those functions, if you dig into them, very quickly kind of say, am I in this environment? And if not, just don't do anything. So it is able that way to kind of, out of the box, fulfill most of your needs. You don't have to have all of this. You can programmatically establish your telemetry pipeline and choose which ones to bring in and which NuGet packages to bring in. This is fairly easy, and for the purposes of a demo, it's the way we're going today. For full framework, this all happens inside of a config file, or is all governed by a config file. And very similar, it brings in the kitchen sink, and you can certainly prune out the config file. .NET Core doesn't use the config file approach. And again, in both of them, you can actually programmatically affect that pipeline as well through the SDK. Let's see, what other fun stuff has happened here? App settings.json, so it's updated our application settings, and it's brought in this instrumentation key. And sure enough, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just completely void out that key. Why do I do that? I generally don't even include that key in my applications. The reason being is it's already defined up in the website that I'm deploying to. So it's there and available to be pulled out. In fact, it's in the .NET Core format with the underscores where it'll go ahead and already be ready for the key and child format. I don't want my debugging sessions to emit telemetry to something that's collecting for something else. You know, it's F5, or you put a breakpoint, you're stopped in the middle of a request, suddenly your request is looking very, very long or abnormal. So you don't want to pollute your telemetry that way. Towards the end of the demo, I'll show where we still get some really cool stuff with App Insights inside of our debug sessions. Or you can stand up a dedicated App Insights instance, but it may not even be necessary. Like I said, I generally get this out of developer side so that we don't pollute our telemetry syncs. The other thing is layout.cshtml. If you're familiar with MVC, layout.cshtml gives us a shared baseline for our user interface. So all the user interfaces bring this in. This is injecting a bit of JavaScript into each and every one of my pages. And what this JavaScript does is on page load, it runs on page load, and it times out what's going on your page side. So we got stuff on the server calculating what's going on with our requests as they're coming in, but now we've also got stuff going on in the client saying, okay, this is what's happening with the page as well. So we can see the operation of the site from both sides. There are SDKs, by the way, for JavaScript. If you're using Node and Angular, there is one that's specific to Angular. It doesn't do a lot. It mostly just injects, at least my sense is it mostly just injects the App Insights SDK, JavaScript SDK, into the Angular dependency injection pipeline. But there are tools out there, especially if you're doing a SPA where you're not really necessarily capturing web pages and other things. You're certainly capturing requests, but there are a variety of frameworks supported, I guess, is where I'm going with that. Let's see. The other thing I wanted to show here is I did something weird to my startup file. Let's actually look at what that code is all about. So I had this little ifdef in there that needed to wait for me to bring in my NuGet packages. And basically, it's adding the snapshot collector into the telemetry processing pipeline. In full framework, you don't have to do this. I'm hoping .NET Core will catch up soon, and this boilerplate won't be necessary. But in the documentations for the snapshot collector up on the App Insights docs page, it'll talk about what you need to do here in order to actually add snapshot collection. And I promise I'll tell you what snapshot collection is here in a moment. I mentioned, one other one is, okay, what got done to our project file? We added a couple of NuGet package references. This is related to the fact that I use connected services to do it, just some metadata there. And then it's adding a couple of keys into the inners of the project about what our application insights resource is. These are used, I'll show them later as well, these are used by App Insights, by Visual Studio to have deep integration into application insights and pull information out of App Insights into your local development environment without actually having to write telemetry into that particular instance. Okay, and one more thing I wanted to show, if I come over here to cart context, how do I record custom telemetry with the SDK? So let's go ahead and get items for user. Let's, actually in my cart controller, I'm sorry. Fine, we're just going to do it here. So to do that, we use this class called the telemetry client. So var client equals new telemetry client. And we've got to go ahead and bring in our using statements for that. And then I can do client dot. I said I can do client dot. And track. And we can track, can people see that okay, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. We can track a variety of different kinds of, whoa, hi there, telemetry. Whether it be, I want to track in this case, I want to track a trace statement. Come on. hello code on the beach. And let me just, so I can get my IntelliSense back. I can also track telemetry related to application availability, dependencies, external dependencies I'm calling, events, exceptions. The App Insights SDK, like I said, roots through .NET a lot, especially ASP.NET, and attaches itself and gathers telemetry. But you may have calls that it may not recognize as these categories, or you may want to augment the telemetry it's collecting. And through this API this way, you can go ahead and add to that telemetry that it's collecting. Yes, sir?
Is that how you also guarantee that it's, because we always get the message in our App Insights environment that it's sampling some data and not everything may be returned. If you start putting those explicit calls in there, is it guaranteeing that stuff shows up in App Insights? Or,
no.
Okay.
No, to turn off the sampling, that feeds into the cost a bit, you actually have to do that in the settings. This kind of feeds it into the general processing pipeline. App Insights doesn't want to get into your apps way too much, and if it just capture everything, it might overwhelm your app's performance. So it tries to do some intelligent sampling about what to send, and yeah, I've seen this a million times. I can go ahead and bypass it and things like that to catch everybody up here. There are settings to enable, disable, and toggle that the sampling though. And actually, you can sample in the SDK, and you can sample up on the server as well. You can catch it in both places. OK, so I've got my app instrumented. I would go ahead and publish it. I've already got this published. That's the app that we're working with. That's adding App Insights to your application. Let's look at what we're collecting. So I mentioned it was kind of a first-class citizen over here in web apps. If I come over here to App Insights, this one's already been attached. I don't see attach me. I see I'm already there. If I click on the instance, it should take me to my App Insights instance, and I'll see here it's gathering information about my site for me. Kind of an overview. Here's that, where is that instrumentation key that I showed earlier, and a quick dashboard showing some key metrics, failures, response time, number of requests. But the first thing I want to show you all here is the live metric stream, and I heard somebody I think talking that may enjoy this this particular view. This actually will capture and will get live information about your site usage. So if I come over here and I maybe go to the home page and I view a couple of pages here, we'll see it's gathering information. Let me try and do a little bit of split screen magic here so to kind of see how real time this is. You'll see as I'm clicking through, I've got requests coming in, I'm calling dependencies, I'm calling my table storage that this site is using. And let's see, if I come up to parts again and do my order, sure enough, in pretty real time, I'll see that it's capturing my errors. It's a couple of seconds behind, but I can use this to see what's going on with my site right now. In fact, it's starting to give me some telemetry about my site. I can see, here's the exception, here's some of the problems that happened, and even however much of a stack trace it's going to capture. This is an OK view. It's kind of useful, but it is good for looking at what's going on this very second, not very much an aggregated view. Another view that's really powerful is the application map. As App Insights is gathering and collecting telemetry from your application, including outgoing requests, that it makes into other resources and things like that, it builds up this map of your application. And in this case, it's showing I'm calling my database. I've got my table storage, availability we'll talk about in a second. And if I click on this, on one of the nodes, it gives me kind of a detailed exploration of what's going on with this. My main app has some failures. I can choose to investigate them, some performance issues, maybe some alerts. Another thing I can do with the app map is I can pin it to my dashboard. So by pinning it and going to my dashboard here, and of course it's way over here. Let me see, customize. OK, now this can be a little ornery sometimes while you're placing things, as I said.
No, you can't.
I'm going to get it there. OK. I'm going to leave it here, slide this up, zoom out a little. So now here I can have my Azure dashboard set up so at a glance I can start to get some information about my site. And you know, I've got this 3% of my requests are causing errors. I'd like to look into that a little bit. So let's go up to our App Insights. I can also click on the dashboard and it'll take me there. But while I'm here though, let's go ahead and pin our failed requests and our server response time. Let's actually try that again. Server response time to our dashboard. And oh boy. Yeah. With it being zoomed in like this, it landed a bit closer. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to punt and say, hey, look, they're here. Isn't this fancy? But yeah, you can reposition them and all of that and lay yourself out a real nice and interesting dashboard there. Back to Application Insights, we've got those failures. I'd like to find out a little bit more about them. And I can click here on the failures node, or I can click on the Explore the Failures, and it'll take me here to this view of my failures. Over the last right now it's time slotted over the last 24 hours. Let's see what happened in the last hour. So I can go ahead and zoom in on a particular time region. It actually positions them against things like the number of requests. I can go look at it against CPU. So for example, if you find you're getting a lot of failures as your CPU usage increases, maybe you need to consider scaling your site out at that point. Maybe you're getting failures due to a scale issue. Memory, storage, I/O operations, requests. And I can see, okay, these endpoints are causing this many problems over this much time, and it's ordered by the number. I can even zoom in a little bit on a particular time zone. I can see dependency calls, so if I'm calling out to a database and it's generating failures, or to a storage location and it's generating failures, or I can outright just see the exceptions. And sure enough, I've got a bunch of null reference exceptions. Well, let me find out a little bit about them. Oh, look. It's telling me that I've got an object is not a no reference exception. And it's listed all of them, but it's kind of saying, you know what, this one is kind of emblematic of the problem. Let's use this one as the one that we want to dig into. And of course, it's not the one that I really want to see right now because it's not showing me the view that I want. Let's see if I can get the view a little bit better on one of these. Of course not. Of course, this always works. This worked beautifully an hour ago. Let's go and expand our time zone out to 12 hours, 24 hours, and let's look at this right here. Let's see if we can get a little bit better of a view here. Okay, argument exception, the 13 exceptions. I'll come back to the one I was working on. Well, there we go. It just needed a little bit of a kick. I'll try our actual exception because it's got a little more relevant information about what we're looking at here. So the last hour, right there, and 13 exceptions. This is the one. Come on. Well, okay, I'm just going to keep going from here. I don't know why this is misbehaving right now, but you notice it was giving me a Gantt view of the request that originally came in, the call to the dependency, and then the exception that was raised. And if you've got a complex function that this is happening on, your Gantt chart will be a little bit more detailed than this one was in particular. But it's giving me information about that particular exception. It's a no reference exception. Let's see, what all telemetry are we capturing here? What operation was it? What version of the SDK? Information about it. It came from Jacksonville, Florida. I think it nailed that pretty well. Which server, what particular server happened to be fielding that request if I had a server farm involved. And, oh look, a stack trace about the exception. And it happened in cart context line 62. So let's look at cart context and line 62, and what does that tell me? Well, end of the function. That's not a whole heck of a lot. I'm not quite sure where I'm getting a null reference exception here. Well, at least I got a function I can look at. I could put some breakpoints in and work this out myself and go from there. Or, look, it captured this thing called a debug snapshot. And this is what those debug snapshots are all about. When App Insights encounters an exception, it will actually take and generate a memory dump. It'll generate a snapshot of the system at that point, in the background, non-intrusive to your application. It doesn't do them for every single exception it calls. There's actually some throttling involved in that. And that I captured here in startup. The default settings that you can tweak on the snapshot collector are things like how many times an exception needs to happen before you think you need to capture the snapshot for it. What's the maximum number that I'm going to capture for a given problem, and the maximum number of problems I'll track at once, and how often do I reset that? You know, daily is the default, 50 problems a day, no more than 3 snapshots for a particular problem, and how many snapshots do I capture in a 10-minute window or in a day in order to keep this from overwhelming your system. But looking at the snapshot, let's go ahead and open this thing. And it'll take a second. And sure enough, I've got my call stack here, but I've also got stack information about my process, the exception, the this value. And if I come back here, I'll notice, oh, user is null. Well, if I look back at my code and come back to cart context, where was I? If user is null, well, that's going to be a problem. So I can use that information to debug in and find out the nature of my problem. I could use that to make a change to my application, hide the button if the user's not logged in or something similar. But if I go back to my site and I actually log in, or if the user actually filed a bug report and is on the phone and steamed, I can say, hey, you may want to try and log in before you go ahead and add stuff to your cart. And sure enough, I add to the cart. And I'm not interested in my last pass. Come on, add to the cart. And I've got an item in the cart and no more exceptions. So we were able to use that to root cause down to the nature of the exception. I use this with sites that I work on daily. I will start my day, cup of coffee in one hand, let's go and look to see what the failures were that have happened over the last day or so and see if there's anything salient that needs to be addressed, that's important at that point.
To get this all working, you have to turn it on in Azure. You have to turn it on in Azure and update your code?
You can get some information by just turning it on in Azure. You get deeper insights. Things like the snapshot, you got to fire it up in the code as well.
And if you're running, if you're working locally, any way to tie into this?
If you're working as in on-premise installation or as in debugging?
As in dev development.
As far as the stack trace, if you're working in Visual Studio, you probably don't need it a whole lot at that point. If you want to tap into send, well, no, because it won't. If the process is running locally, it won't capture it. Nothing immediate in terms of the snapshot capture, but again, hopefully at that point you do have Visual Studio maybe to help you out a little bit. But
actually, I was more. I guess it's not really useful, but I was actually thinking if I wanted to play around with this, and I've got like free Azure hours.
Yeah.
I had a local app, but essentially I'd have to like push the app.
Well, or push the telemetry. If you don't want to deal with the snapshot debugger, but you can certainly gather the telemetry from an on-premises app and send it. This app, like I said, you have to get rid of that instrumentation key or you'll accidentally send telemetry up. Okay. If I debug this app, I'm going to get ahead of myself here, but if I debug this app, it's actively going to collect App Insights telemetry. If I had an instrumentation key, it would actually send it on up to Azure for me. Here it is running in localhost. If I come on over here to the output panel, debug, you'll see App Insights telemetry unconfigured. It's not going to an instance, it's recording it locally. And this is something I'd save for the back end of the presentation, but let's jump on into it. Sorry, over here in diagnostics, I'll also see I'm recording App Insights events. But this App Insights thing here, but you'll notice if I click on App Insights here, let me come in and generate a error so we can actually see it. You know, I'll do the add to cart failure. Okay, this is running on localhost. If I come back to Visual Studio and the Visual Studio view of it, I will see I've got an exception there. So Visual Studio can tap into that telemetry it's doing locally, and I can use that to get all this rich information over here and see what's going on without actually having to hit an App Insights in the cloud. The other interesting thing that it's doing, remember I mentioned it made those changes to the inside of the project. If I hover over here, if you have Visual Studio Pro or Enterprise, you get the code lens stuff. And if I see 2 exceptions, 32 live, in debug, I have 2 exceptions, blah, 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 blah. And in my live site, because that was inside the Visual Studio project, it can reach out and say, oh yeah, by the way, in your production site, you've got these problems that you may need to deal with. So it'll bring it up inside of the code lens right on the function. Okie dokie. So what have we seen in App Insights, and where am I time-wise? We are at 25, and oh. Okay, yeah, we're kind of right on target here. Good. Some of the other things. So I showed the failures. The other thing I wanted to show with with this exception is slide down here. I can also look and see something like show all availability for this user session. And if I click on that, it'll take me over to the search panel, and it's going to show all the telemetry gathered in this user session. So from this, when this user started the browser, started interacting with the site, and then finished with the browser. Let me filter on that a little bit further. I come over here to filters, and I can see, yeah, it's looking on a particular session ID, but let me get rid of all of these, trace, page view, context exception, telemetry, done. And sure enough, if I scroll down far enough, if I scroll down not too far, here are the requests that the user made as part of his interaction that led to that error. So he went to the home page, did some things on the home page, but I can see here are the things that user was doing while interacting with my site. So we get that, I don't know what I was doing, I don't know, I clicked on some stuff and it busted. Well, now we can actually kind of walk back what you were doing and get the telemetry off those operations. And we can dig through that in a variety of different ways. Another way to use the search panel, if I come on over here to search, and I can look for beach. I've been doing this demo for a little while, so beach has been in there for a bit. If I come in over the last hour and update it, and remember I wrote that trace statement. Here's all the trace statements with beach in it. So if the user went to a particular URL, if you can pull something off their query string that you can search on, or a variety of other things that if I want to search on Jacksonville for all requests in Jacksonville, this will pour through that telemetry and let me get that view into that telemetry. We got search. Okay. Another really, really cool one here is availability. One of the first things you should do when you get into App Insights is come over to the Availability tab and add a test. And you'll notice here it's going to give my test a name, and I'm going to go Demo Availability. And I can choose either a URL ping test or a multi-step web test. URL ping test goes to a URL. Multi-step is I can actually build a test in Visual Studio and upload it. There's an extra charge for that, but if you have things like logins and other stuff, you may want to do that in order to use this feature. If I come on over here and copy it, let me bring in it doesn't have to be the URL it comes up with. I'll use my actual URL. Parse dependent request says when I go to this page, if it's loading images or stuff, load them up too and look at them and make sure everything's cool with them, images or script files or other things that are triggering as part of this request. Retries every 5 minutes. Now what am I doing? Well, every 5 minutes from 5 locations in the US, or I can choose other locations. I actually, one site I've got this set up so that it generates these tests from US, another test generates tests from Asia, and another test generates tests from Europe. Telling it, look for a response code of 200. I can actually put content in here that has to be matched and do it within 120 seconds. And the point of this all is if any of this fails, if in this case, sorry, if 3 requests fail inside of a 5-minute period, send me an alert. Send me an email to all the subscription admins, or I can provide some other email addresses in there, or I can provide a webhook that it'll call back to. So I could set up a function or a logic app in Azure that calls Twilio that then generates an SMS message that says, hey, your site is down. You don't have to wait for your users to call you and say, the site's down. You can know about it before they do because this thing is going to be constantly checking and sending requests every couple of minutes to your site. If I create the test has been created. If I refresh it, if I've named this correctly, I should see, well, it's got a couple outliers in there. Over the last hour, oh no, that's not a good one because I disabled it about an hour ago. But over the last 4 hours, over the last 12 hours, just kind of a bit of a spray chart as to what's been going on with your site availability. I had one request that took nearly 6 seconds a little while ago. If it's just the one, maybe not a big deal, but I may want to keep an eye on that. All of this for, again, it was that easy to set up to monitor my site's availability. Let's see, the other one I want to talk about here is the performance view. Very similar to the failures view. You can isolate by request count. I can do operations or calls to dependencies, but it's going to gather information about the performance of the calls to my site. And I can just say, give me the overall average, give me the 50th, the 99th percentile if I want to remove outlier, one-off outlier kind of things. But I can start to see which are the parts of my site that are causing the users the most pain, which parts are taking the most time. And I can dig in on this. And much like we've got the snapshot collector, there's actually a performance profiler that runs a couple of minutes every hour and will gather hot path information for our site to see where are our performance bottlenecks. Or I can put it in firefighting mode and I can say, run me a performance exercise right now over people as they're using the site, gather that information, then I can dig into it and watch the, and again, look for hot flare-ups, places that are causing performance problems. Beyond all that, we've got this servers view. I only have one server in my farm, but we've seen web farms, virtual machines and what have you, where one server is just out to lunch. It is having a bad day. It needs to be taken out back and shot in the head. I'm sorry. I live near a farm, so it's a little. That sounds. Let me walk that back a little bit. It needs to. That one server needs to be shut down and replaced with another one. I can see a per server view about what's going on here in my site. I've also. Also from my browser, so this is that page telemetry that's coming up, which pages are going fast or slow. If I'm running AJAX calls, what are they doing? How's my traffic? Again, performance from the point of view of the browser. Beyond that, we've got a few other ways that the data is being aggregated for us.
On the browser, does it record the browsers that's being used?
We come into this user's view. You're just about a second ahead of me here. I can see, what are the characteristics of the users who've used the site over a particular time frame. And we can get things like, okay, in this case, all of my users on this site came from the United States. That's pretty much to be expected. What operating system are they running on? And what browser version do they happen to be using? Just bringing in the browser header information and using and slicing and dicing on that. Sorry, the request header information. And I can even go in a little bit further on this, and I can see, users in Jacksonville are generating a session. They tend to be on Windows 10 and on Chrome, but I can get, information about what's going on with my individual users this way. I can also slice it. Let's go ahead and, split by browser version and kind of get a view of, okay, here they are broken down by browser. So this is that empirical information to bring into your sprint planning meeting when everybody's using IE8. Well, no, not really. Likewise, a very similar breakdown for sessions instead of discrete user sessions, events. Funnels is an interesting one, a good conversation starter. So based on people coming to my home page, how many of them end up going to my login page? 10 people came to my home page, 2 people went to my login page. So you can start to see, of the people who come here, how many go there? You can kind of take a step back and see, yeah, we're just gathering generic telemetry. This is just slicing and dicing that telemetry in some interesting ways for us.
That could be really good for finding a conversion rate type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, when you're doing a promotion or again, how many users logged in? How many users registered? How many users signed up? If I get 1,000 users on the front page, but only 2 are signing up, is that good, bad, or otherwise for my site? You can measure that, gather that, and look at it.
I think you need to check out.
Yes. Well, yeah, the site is a minimum viable product. Very emphasis on the minimum. Yeah, you'll also find there's a problem when you go to remove items from your cart.
Oh, okay.
Some of these are intentional, some aren't. But okay, so the user flow view gives you kind of a map view of what do users do based on, when they come to this page or when they land on this page, how did they get here and where are they going? Another one is retention. How many users are coming back over a period of time? How sticky is my site? And this will give you kind of a view of that. Impact, I call this one the bar bet page. Settle a bar bet for me. It's also the one where somebody comes in and says, our home page is taking so long that nobody wants to go to our promotion page. It just takes too dang long to load. So, well, really? Okay. So looking at the home page, how does its direction affect usage of the, let's go with the login page for this example, over the last week? And kind of correlate that. And based on that, it's going to kind of tell me, how long it takes the home page to load has absolutely no impact whatsoever on whether or not people are going to the login page. So this is that as people do this, how likely are they to do that, or how does this affect them to do that? Again, same telemetry, it's just taking it and slicing it and dicing it in these interesting ways. Okay, so we went over that. Analytics. So all of this, I'm going to come over here to the failures page, is built on top of an analytics platform. And you'll notice in a lot of the pages here in Application Insights, we've got this little Tetris thing here that you can use to open up your page over in the analytics tool. In this case, I can actually see a request. Let's click on that. It's going to take me into another tool. This is going to show me the data and the query that was used to generate that information that we see there on the screen. And if you want to do stuff, if you want to look at your data in ways that App Insights isn't making available for you out of the box, you can always come over here to Analytics and look and try and do it that way. Let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit better. Is that better? Mm-hmm. So I can see over here, here are the various tables or pseudo tables of data that are being collected. If I look at requests, I can see these are the various fields that are being collected for all the requests. And again, this is the rather complex query that was used to generate that information that's being displayed in the request information. I've got a not as complex one over here. Where is my open? Control minus. There it is. Sorry, lost part of it there. My queries and analytics demo. There we go. So I've got my, App Insights isn't telling me this. I really want to find this out. I can actually go and say, from the request table where I'm dealing with either get or post operations, and it's not a synthetic request. A synthetic request is something that's generated synthetically. It's one of those availability requests. It's not a user using the site request. And look and see, and also, by the way, if the operation just is the backslash, call it home index, so I know that it's actually the home page that I'm talking about here. Count the number of requests and count the total duration. This is totally contrived. And then order it out for me. And then if I run it, I can either just see the raw data. Let me go ahead and comment that line out. And sure enough, I can see, okay, these are the requests. That's the overall duration for that particular request. Or I can get kind of fancy with this thing, and I can come on up here and run it. And yeah, cool, I got a bar graph. Beyond that, I can take this, and I can pin it back to my Azure dashboard. And if I come on over here to my dashboards and refresh the page, I'm not going to try and position this. We're just going to deal with the fact that it's way over here. But here is that same chart. So I can get my analytics, explore them, do some data analysis, save queries, try and figure them out. But I can also expose them out and bring them in here as custom views into my data as well. Let's see. I showed the telemetry in Visual Studio. We got about 5 minutes left, so we're doing good here. Let me come over here and back to the last couple of slides. So here's the important part. What are we talking about here? How much is this going to cost me? And to me, at least, this is a lot of the reasons why I haven't gone to one of the other solutions. The base price for App Analytics is free, and that'll get you a gig per month of telemetry. How much telemetry is your site going to gather? Well, I mentioned earlier I'm a consultant, so the only answer I'm going to be able to give you is it depends. It really does depend on how big of a site, how many users, how much interactivity. Is it stand on one page and stare at it, or is it clickety 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 throughout the site? It varies, but there's a blade over in the App Insights portal, and I've got some time, so let's see if we can show that.
I was looking at the calculator, and it looks like they may have upped it to 5 gigabytes.
The calculator's kind of weird. Yeah, the pricing calculator in Azure is what he's talking about, because it says, oh, go look at log analytics, but there's this 5 number in here. I pulled the 1 gig number from the usage and estimated cost blade over in App Insights, where it actually tell me that 230 after the first gigabyte each month. So I'm going based on that. But it's telling me, here's my usage. By the way, here's the areas in which I've had that said usage. So I can kind of keep an eye, where's my cost coming from? Deploy this into dev, deploy this into test, figure out what your usage and costs are going to be before you actually incur the cost on promotion, or watch it carefully. And well, I'll talk in one more thing about that.
Can you just tell it to shut it off if it's going to cost you money?
Yes.
Good.
So that was the other part to it. Data is retained for 90 days. I'm sorry?
You're paying a lot, it means you have a lot of traffic.
Yeah, it may be a good problem. Exactly. Yeah, that's again. Yeah, if you're generating a ton of telemetry, you probably have a good problem on your hands, or a site that's out of control.
Will your local debugging affect that amount of data if you accidentally?
If you're sending it up there, data is data. It doesn't care where it's coming from. Let's see. But the additional data is only $2.30 per gigabyte per month. So it's not, it's not one of the more expensive features in Azure. Data is retained for 90 days, period. Yeah, the only way I know to get around that is to actually delete the App Insights instance and lower that number. However, if you need data for longer, you can use continuous export, which as of May is free. And that you can use to just send the data out to a blob storage location. You can't use the same App Insights tool to study it at the point you're out of App Insights, but you've got this nice JSON data that you can use and you can explore using other tools. It connects up to an OMS to log analytics, so you can get a holistic view of your system and your solution and tap into individual applications within it. And like I said, the multi-step web tests, the ones that you have to upload from Visual Studio, they cost $10 per test per month. On the server, you can deal with the data volume management, sampling settings. I notice you can also play with them in settings on your client. And you can set daily data cap settings and things like that in order to help govern this. A few helpful, let me get to the right page where I can actually affect the, a few helpful resources. So a lot of good documentation on App Insights. There were several sessions at the Build conference this year for App Insights. That analytics, there's a document there. There's also a cheat sheet. If you're used to SQL query language, that cheat sheet is kind of handy to know if I want to do this, this is how I key it in over here. An overview and an MSDN magazine article related to the Snapshot debugger, and there's even a REST API for interacting and getting data. The data into App Insights is of course REST, but there's actually an API also for interacting with and consuming the data that's in App Insights. So that takes us right about to the top of the hour. I want to thank you all and hope you have a good rest of the code on the beach.